frontline workers and support for them in the work that they have to do in relationship to parishioners, in relationship to communities where they are called upon to intervene. The church leaders through the South African Council of Churches has also engaged around this issue of is it possible for us to consider opening worship places for purposes of worship? And they have developed norms and standards that would have to be worked through by congregations to arrive at the decision whether or not they will open for worship or when they will open for worship. And so they went to the trouble of developing norms and standards for that purpose. They have also developed some protocols in respect of funerals, and then through the Western Cape Ecumenical Network and the other ecumenical bodies in the province, there has been the engagement with provincial government on a regular basis around these issues as well. And so the documentation that emerged out of that engagement has also been shared with churches across the board. And of course, you know, there's been the national engagement between the SACC and national government. Then two other points that I want to raise and then really respond if there are questions. The one point is the fact that the church is an autonomous body, dependent on its membership and support financially from its membership. And that financial support has been jeopardized by COVID-19. And Trevor very beautifully related the difference, and again, the inequality, the top 5 and the bottom 5 of the 50 churches. Lutando referred to that inequality. So in your some congregations, members were able to continue supporting by using EFTs and supporting their congregations and the ministry of the congregation. Some churches that I've spoken to have said members have actually come and dropped their tithes and offerings at the church office, and that has helped to sustain congregations during this period that they were able to continue their ministry. But by virtue of the inequality, there are congregations composed through the majority of members in our society where they just don't have those financial means available. And so this autonomy of the church, dependent on its membership, is also something that would have to receive our attention, because we have been able to speak prophetically, we have been able to challenge, we have been able to engage in different ways by virtue of the autonomy that the church has experienced as an organization, as a body within the society. And so while some may have been able to benefit out of the UIF, the church is not in a position, unless it jeopardizes its own autonomy, to say that it becomes as dependent on the state for support and then deal with the consequences that will flow from that. The other point that I want to make is that we had a presentation from the Solidarity Fund, and the appeal has been made for churches also to make themselves and their facilities available and their communication channels available so that we can communicate the message of behavior change that is going to be essential as we move forward. Because the virus is not going to disappear within the foreseeable future. Even if a vaccine is found, there still needs to be immunization, and it's an open question as to how long that immunization will be effective. And so behavior change is inevitable as we begin to grapple with the reality that we will have to learn to live with this virus in our midst. Now, the appeal is made to the churches on the basis that churches had already made some of their facilities available for testing, for isolation, for people in quarantine. And so the response has been there on the part of the churches in many different ways. And at the level of the SACC, Western Cape Ecumenical Network, there have been responses that have been developed during this period that have been very, very effective in addressing the needs that have emerged during this time. Thank you.
Many thanks to you, Lionel. Thank you to all of the speakers. Very, very challenging. Ruth Jonas speaks. One of the last comments, care for clergy. I think Lionel also mentioned about the mental health of the clergy. I said in my introduction that towards the end of August, we hope to have a webinar on self-care of clergy. Now, a very bleak picture has been painted of churches, UIF not being paid, and a picture has been painted of how difficult it is. The reality of 1/3 being unemployed and 2/3 of people not having groceries. This is terrible. I don't have to mention to you the dominee on the West Rand in Johannesburg that hanged himself, that committed suicide because he could not see the hurt and the suffering of his people anymore. So one needs to think of that side of the pulpit as well. But that, Ruth, will be for a later webinar. Please contact me if you have more in that regard. The other questions, I think any of the panelists can come in, but there's one by Rose that speaks of the current economic system. Are these challenges perhaps pointing to, or has anything to do with our current economic system? Maybe. Craig, if we could put that into your lap. And I'm not sure if the other response by Andrew Kerr is, Andrew Kerr already referred to the UIF, but the one before that spoke of Louise Brainers, that speaks of the church's finance. What is the purpose of about the sustainability? Is it only salaries, properties that are being paid for, and the diaconic programs? May I also just mention we've been running for just on an hour. So, Craig, if I could ask you to respond to any of the questions or comments that have been raised, please.
Thank you, Bruce. I'll just take a stab at the question from Rose about the economic system. So the short answer is yes, but it's much more complicated